He didn't command an army. He didn't control a country. He wasn't even on most people's radar until he was already inside their lives, rearranging airports, launching wars, and turning ordinary Tuesday mornings into the most watched moment in human history. One man, 19 hijackers, 3,000 people dead before lunch. But here's the thing nobody really talks about. The most dangerous thing about Osama bin Laden wasn't the attacks. It was how ordinary his beginning was. He was born in 1957, the son of a construction billionaire in Saudi Arabia. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, had clawed his way up from a poor Yemeni immigrant family to become one of the most powerful businessmen in the Arab world. By the time Osama arrived, the family was worth what would today translate to billions. They had contracts to renovate the most sacred mosques in Islam, Mecca and Medina. They literally rebuilt the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Osama inherited over $30 million. He went to school in Jeddah. He watched Arsenal. He had a thing for military history. Normal, right? Well, sort of. His mother was Mohammed's 10th wife, a 14-year-old Syrian girl he married when he was 48. They separated almost immediately after Osama was born, which has led some historians to suggest she was never really a wife at all. Osama was then raised by his mother and her new husband, a business associate of his father's, growing up in a blended household with a rotating cast of half-siblings. And yet, his father never really left his world. Mohammed bin Laden filled the space around young Osama with one thing above all else: religious intensity. Conservative, fervent, uncompromising. Then, in 1967, Mohammed bin Laden died. His pilot misjudged the landing, and that was it. Gone. Osama was 10 years old. It shouldn't matter that much. Rich kids lose fathers all the time. But here's where it gets strange. The Saudi bin Laden group didn't collapse. It exploded, expanding into a multi-billion-dollar empire across the Middle East. Osama had the inheritance. He had the name. He had everything a person needs to live a comfortable, forgettable life. Instead, at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, he discovered something that bent the entire arc of his future. Not economics, though that's what he was supposed to be studying, not business. Something older and more dangerous. Ideas. Specifically, the ideas of a man named Sayyid Qutb. Qutb was an Egyptian scholar, brilliant, furious, and executed by his own government in 1966. His writings had been circulating through Muslim schools and universities for decades, and what he argued in page after page of dense, passionate prose was essentially this: the Western world, especially America, was godless, spiritually empty, and actively destroying Islam. The only answer was jihad, a new Islamic caliphate, Sharia law across every Muslim nation, no compromises, no half measures. Qutb's brother was a professor at the very university Osama attended. The timing was impeccable, and not in a good way. Because just as Osama was finishing his studies in 1979, the world around him caught fire. Iran had just had its revolution, the Western-backed Shah thrown out, an Islamic republic declared overnight. Up in Afghanistan, a Marxist party called the PDPA had seized power the year before, dragging the country towards Soviet-style secularism. And then, in December 1979, the Soviet Union did what it had been building toward for decades. They invaded. 80,000 troops, tanks rolling into Kabul, the world's largest atheist empire occupying one of the most deeply Muslim countries on earth. For someone already primed on Qutb's ideas, already believing that Islam was under siege from godless Western powers, this wasn't just a geopolitical crisis. This was a calling. Osama was 22 years old. He had $30 million and a religious education and a burning need to do something. He went to Pakistan. In Pakistan, he fell in with Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian-born jihadist who had already become one of the most influential figures in the Islamic militant world. Azzam pointed north toward the mountains of Afghanistan and told bin Laden, "Go," and bin Laden went. What followed across the 1980s is the part of the story that gets genuinely complicated, because the United States, through the CIA, was funneling billions of dollars into the same Afghan mujahideen that bin Laden was supporting. Saudi Arabia was doing the same. This wasn't secret. Everyone agreed. Stop the Soviets at any cost. Bin Laden spent the early years moving between Pakistan and the cave systems of the Hindu Kush. He wasn't just fighting, he was organizing. In 1984, he and Azam set up Maktab al-Khidamat, an organization designed to funnel money and fighters from across the Arab world into the Afghan resistance. By 1986, his network had trained hundreds of fighters at a base he called Al-Masada, the Lion's Den. In the spring of 1987, those fighters held the Battle of Jaji against Soviet forces. Tactically, not that significant. But the battle was covered by a young Saudi journalist named Jamal Khashoggi. Yes, that Jamal Khashoggi. And suddenly bin Laden was famous across the Arab world. A hero. A warrior prince who left a fortune behind to fight in the mountains. Standard logic says a man who already has everything fights for nothing. Bin Laden demolished that assumption completely. But here's what nobody was paying attention to. As the Soviets began to lose, as it became clear Afghanistan would be theirs, bin Laden's thinking was already moving to a new target. In 1988, with the war winding down, he and a small group of ideological hardliners broke away to form something new, something with a larger vision. They called it Al-Qaeda, the base, the foundation. Al-Qaeda's goal wasn't just Afghanistan, it was every Muslim land, the entire Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa, anywhere that bin Laden believed non-Muslims, especially Americans, had inserted their influence. The strategic plan was almost absurdly ambitious: provoke a total war against the United States, radicalize the Muslim world, establish a new caliphate governed by a rigid reading of the Quran. The method in the early years would be terrorism. The Soviets pulled their last troops out of Afghanistan in 1989. Bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia a hero. That should have been the peak. It wasn't. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Within weeks, the United States was assembling a massive coalition to push him back out. And they needed a base of operations. Saudi Arabia, holder of Mecca and Medina, the holiest places in Islam, agreed to host hundreds of thousands of American troops. Bin Laden was furious. He actually went to King Fahd and made a proposal. Let me defend Saudi Arabia. I'll use the veterans from Afghanistan. Keep the Americans out. He was laughed out of the room. What happened next set the rest of his life in motion. He started publicly denouncing the Saudi government. He tried to convince senior Islamic scholars to issue a religious declaration against the American presence. He called the royal family traitors, inviting Western infidels into the heart of Islam. The Saudis expelled him in 1991. And here's the thing about a man who feels simultaneously righteous and humiliated. He doesn't get quieter, he gets focused. Bin Laden moved to Sudan in 1992, where a sympathetic Islamist government gave him free rein. He built training camps near Khartoum. He lived in a manor. Al-Qaeda's network stretched quietly across the globe. And meanwhile, the Americans were watching. The CIA began monitoring him almost daily. Satellite overflights of his compound, intelligence gathering, surveillance. But in the early 1990s, he was still considered a financier, an organizer, a dangerous man, yes, but not yet the architect of something unprecedented. That perception was already wrong. In 1993, a truck bomb exploded beneath the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. The attacker, Ramzi Youssef, had trained in Al-Qaeda camps. The goal had been to collapse the tower into its twin, potentially killing tens of thousands. It failed, but the target had been chosen. The ambition was already there. In 1992, Al-Qaeda bombed a hotel in Yemen. In 1997, they are believed to have been connected to the massacre of 62 people, mostly Western tourists, at an Egyptian archaeological site. In August 1998, they detonated simultaneous truck bombs outside U.S. embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, killing 213 people in Kenya and 85 in Tanzania. After the embassy bombings, the FBI placed Osama bin Laden on their 10 most wanted list. The world finally knew his name. But even then, even with all of this, intelligence services still hadn't fully grasped what was coming. Sometime in late 1998 or early 1999, bin Laden approved a plan that had been floating around Al-Qaeda since 1996. It had been proposed by a man named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed: hijack commercial aircraft, fly them into buildings, The planning was meticulous. They needed operatives who spoke English, who could blend into Western society. Mohammed Atta was selected, Marwan al-Shihi, Ziad Jarrah. Hani Hanjour was added specifically because he held a commercial pilot's license. By 2000, 19 men had been placed in cells across Arizona, Florida, and California. Final targets were locked in by early 2001. The Twin Towers, the Pentagon, the U.S. Capitol. The date chosen was September 11, 2001. Bin Laden reportedly selected it because it was the anniversary of the 1683 Battle of Vienna. The moment Ottoman expansion into Europe was stopped cold. He wanted 9/11 to be the moment the tide turned back, a symbolic inversion of history. On the morning of that day, 4 planes took off from Boston, Washington, and Newark. Within hours, America, and then the world, would never be the same. The sequence of events on September 11th is almost too well known to need retelling, and yet the numbers remain staggering. 2 planes hit the Twin Towers within 17 minutes of each other. A third hit the Pentagon. A fourth crashed into a Pennsylvania field when passengers, having learned via phone calls what the other planes had done, attempted to take back control. The South Tower fell at 9:59 a.m., the North Tower 29 minutes later. Over 2,600 people died in the towers, 147 in the sky above them, 125 at the Pentagon, 40 in that Pennsylvania field, nearly 3,000 people dead before noon. And the footage of the planes hitting the towers, was broadcast live, repeated endlessly, seared into the memory of an entire generation simultaneously. Bin Laden initially denied involvement, but by 2004, he released a video on Al Jazeera stating clearly, without ambiguity, that he had directed the 19 hijackers. He said the targeting of the Twin Towers was symbolic revenge for towers destroyed in Beirut during the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon. He'd planned it for years, and it worked, in the most horrifying sense of the word. What happened next was the part bin Laden had wanted all along. America went to war, Afghanistan first. The Taliban, who had sheltered al-Qaeda since 1996, refused to hand over bin Laden, so American and British aircraft began bombing in October 2001. By November, Kabul had fallen. The Taliban scattered, but bin Laden slipped away. He was believed to be in the Tora Bora cave complex in the White Mountains. A 2-week battle was fought there. U.S. Special Forces, Allied fighters, Northern Alliance troops. Intelligence services believe bin Laden was there, present during the fighting. But there weren't enough boots on the ground to seal the border with Pakistan, and he escaped. Most likely he walked south into Pakistan in the winter of 2001. Iraq followed in 2003. The U.S. claimed connections to al-Qaeda, claimed weapons of mass destruction. Neither turned out to be fully true, but the war happened anyway, and the ensuing chaos handed al-Qaeda exactly the foothold they wanted in a destabilized Muslim country. Bin Laden watched all of this from hiding, almost certainly from Waziristan in northern Pakistan, then later from somewhere even more audacious. In 2005, a purpose-built compound was completed in Abbottabad, Pakistan, a comfortable city not far from Islamabad, home to a major Pakistani military academy. The compound sat on 38,000 square feet, surrounded by concrete walls 5.5 meters high and topped with barbed wire. Almost no windows, screens blocking all views inside. A privacy barrier on the 3rd-floor balcony specifically tall enough to conceal a man who was 6'4". Osama bin Laden, the most wanted man on earth, moved in and stayed for approximately 5 years. The CIA began tracking his location through a courier named Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, who had been spotted in Abbottabad in 2009. By 2010, a dedicated CIA team was on the ground, monitoring the compound. They spent months watching, drone surveillance, human intelligence, tens of millions of dollars, and they never got a definitive photograph. Never confirmed beyond doubt that bin Laden was inside, but by early 2011, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. President Barack Obama authorized Operation Neptune Spear. On the night of May 1st, 2011, 2 Black Hawk helicopters carrying 24 Navy SEALs lifted off from an airbase in Afghanistan and crossed into Pakistan. They landed in the compound just after midnight local time. One helicopter crashed during landing. No one was injured. The firefight began immediately. They moved through the compound floor by floor. On the second floor, they shot one of bin Laden's adult sons and the courier whose trail had led them here. Then they went upstairs. On the third floor, in the doorway of his bedroom, Osama bin Laden was shot, in the body and the head. He fell backwards into the room and died. In his robes they found 500 euros and 2 mobile phones, sewn into the fabric. Emergency escape supplies. He'd been ready to run. He just wasn't fast enough. His body was flown back, identified by 8 p.m. Washington time, and within 24 hours was weighted with iron chains and dropped into the sea, deliberately, so no grave could ever become a shrine. Barack Obama addressed the nation that night. Crowds gathered outside the White House. The man who had changed the course of history was dead. And yet, the death of Osama bin Laden did not end what he'd started. If anything, what came after was worse. Even as Al-Qaeda was being dismantled in Afghanistan and Pakistan, something was metastasizing in Iraq, a splinter group that had grown out of the chaos of the American occupation. By 2014, they called themselves the Islamic State, and they made Al-Qaeda look moderate. Al-Qaeda, the organization that carried out 9/11, was being called too restrained by the next generation of jihadists. The Islamic State seized territory across northern Iraq and eastern Syria. They declared a caliphate, the very thing bin Laden had dreamed about. And their brutality toward Muslims who didn't comply, toward journalists, toward anyone in their path, shocked even the most hardened veterans of the global war on terror. It took an international coalition years to break them. And even now, the ideology hasn't died. It's shifted, south, into the Sahel, into Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso, where jihadi groups are actively destabilizing entire nations. So, what do you do with a figure like Osama bin Laden? He was born rich. He could have spent his life building things, quite literally, given the family business. Instead, he built something else, a network, an ideology, a war that killed hundreds of thousands of people and rearranged the geopolitical map of the world for decades. He didn't win, but he didn't exactly lose either. The wars his attacks triggered cost the United States alone trillions of dollars and thousands of soldiers' lives. The psychological impact, the airport security, the surveillance infrastructure, the political fractures, became permanent features of modern life. He died in a fortified compound with 500 euros sewn into his clothes, shot by men he never saw coming. But the world he made, we're still living in it. The question that nobody has really answered, that nobody can fully answer, is whether a man like bin Laden shapes history, or whether history was always going to produce someone exactly like him. Whether removing Osama bin Laden from the equation would have changed anything at all, or whether the forces he rode, the ideologies, the grievances, the power vacuums, would have found another vehicle regardless. That's not a comfortable question, but it might be the most important one we can ask.